This is Talking Devils, the leading independent Manchester United podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Barton, joined as usual, but in a very different format today by the legendary football writer, Paddy Barclay. Good morning, Paddy. How are you doing?
Good morning, Wayne. Good morning, everybody. Very well indeed. Thank you. As we speak, the morning after a Manchester United victory, however one, that must be weighed against the quality of the opposition. But that I'm sure will unfold.
Similar story to your team, aren't we? Really, the start of the season, a couple of losses, a couple of wins in there. How are Dundee faring?
I thought you meant Fulham, my English, my Premier League team, who've had a great start. But Dundee, we've had what was it Manchester United have spent in the transfer window? Wayne, you'd have the correct figure, but it's over
Around
200 million.
200 million, yeah.
Yeah, 200 million. Well, we've spent, you know, all those notes on the end of the 200 and 200 are the two. We've spent the last of those notes.
Yeah.
I tell you, it's a different world. But I still love Dundee as much as you and everybody else who's with us today loves Manchester United. I quite like Manchester
Yeah. Fulham started the season quite well. They a slightly different transfer approach to Nottingham Forest. They've gone for a little more stability than Forest's two-team transfers.
Exactly, but both teams came up together. I must admit, I felt, particularly with the investment that Forest made, that Forest could be the best of the three promoted clubs. But of course, they had one or two loan players in that very good promotion side under Cooper, and so they've had to bring in a lot of players. 21 has got to be a record, hasn't it? But yeah, anyway, there's some good ones among them, and I still feel that Forest will find their feet and will survive. And I think there could be a couple of big names going down at the end of this season. If you look at this sort of early form, okay, we're only just over 10% into the season, 15% into the season, but there are one or two big clubs who are looking, or famous clubs that are looking at the bottom of the league, and Leicester United's opponents last night are one of them. Another blue team, Everton. This great, you know, they're not worried about winning the league; they're worried about staying in it. And for a club with Everton's history, that's not good enough.
No, it's not. It was a good win for United last night. The transfer strategy of Forest it does baffle me a little bit, because I just wonder, when they got to like 15, or when they got to 10, how are they selling the club to the next 10? You know, like, all right, you could say you're going to come in and make a difference, but it's like there's like the team that came up, the team that they brought in, and then this extra team. Oh, you'll be playing if these 6 players out injured. You know what I mean? It seems a bit odd, but it might work for them. It seems a risk.
It does.
Definitely stockpiled for sure. United have made 5 signings. We'll talk about all of them, and a lot of players who did remain. Obviously, we're here to talk about Erik Ten Hag's start to life at Manchester United, and Paddy, as his reputation dictates, is one of the best people to actually talk to about that. Not only his masterful biography of Busby, which I plug every single week on the history podcast that we do, the Football Bloody Hell, the biography of Alex Ferguson, which is no less masterful. Certainly one of my favourite books on Ferguson. So it is with Busby and Ferguson in mind that I wanted to sort of talk to you about Ten Hag, because the common thread that is associated with those two managers when they came into the job is that they demanded an unprecedented amount of control. Busby demanded total control over the club, and Ferguson similar. But in Ferguson's way, it was sort of like, I'm going to overhaul everything anyway, like the youth system and all that. But he also had control over the actual playing squad, that he could get rid of anyone that he wanted to, and we'll talk about the specific examples in a bit. But the control is the tone what I want to start talking about with Ten Hag, because it looks like that's one of the things that he has appeared to insist on. You know, first of all, that he's gone in there, he said, I want control over the playing squad, but also like the amount of discipline that he's instilled. It seems to, first of all, have been clear that he was working that way anyway, but then as soon as United capitulated at Brentford, and he made that very infamous decision to drag them all back into training, and then ran that training lap himself. He did the exact same drill as what he was putting the players through, to sort of say, look, I'm going to do it, you should have to do it as well. A very symbolic message that, I mean, neither Ferguson or Busby did that, but it was a very extreme message, and it seems to have come across in the way control. His team selections are all indicative of the level of control that he's got. And with that being the key word, it's way too early to start saying he's like Busby or Ferguson, but it is very encouraging from a United perspective.
It's still a good comparison, especially as yes, we're talking about different environments, of course, and we can talk about that in a little bit of detail, but he's had to do it much more quickly. As Ferguson often remarked, you know, the pace at which people expect things increased virtually on a steady graph all the way through his quarter century as in charge of Manchester United. And the pace has, if anything, increased. Hence, we've just come out of a transfer window where the Premier League spending pretty well hit £2 billion. That's among, 20 clubs. It's amazing. More than that of all the other three major leagues in Europe combined. So the pace, the intensity of everything has grown, and therefore Ten Hag has, in a sense, had to conduct his revolution, which Ferguson said that his control became real. Of course, his insistence on control at the start, on the day of it, prior to his appointment, was fundamental, as it has been with Ten Hag. But he always said that his actual grip on the club didn't come until after that first trophy in 1990, was it? The FA Cup. And by delivering for United, he then was able to use that control in a much more complete, in a complete way, rather than as an aspiration. Now, what Ten Hag has done is do it in 3 weeks, not between 9 November 1986 and May 1990. As Ten Hag might say, that was luxury, Alex. You know, that they he's had since that less than 3 weeks ago, since the absolute battering at Brentford. He's had basically to get things right, and of course playing Liverpool, you could say was a free hit. In that if they'd lost that game, as every neutral expected them to do, then people would have said, well, yeah, that's Liverpool, come on, give them a break, sort of thing. But they didn't take it as a free hit. They took it as an opportunity. And I mean, that was a sensational performance. Yes, you might say, well, Liverpool were lucky to beat Newcastle the other night, which they were. But Newcastle are a force, going to be a top half club at the very least this season. So Liverpool haven't completely disintegrated. They were beaten conclusively by Manchester United, a Manchester United team with a ferocious work rate, reminiscent, you might say, before we get too carried away about it. From the United point of view, reminiscent of many games in Solskjaer's first year or two, where United could raise the game, rather like, you aren't going to like hearing this, rather like a small club in a cup tie, were able to raise their game for a particular match that they targeted as one that could have an effect on morale. It reminded me a little bit of that, and we mustn't forget that these famous victories did happen under Solskjaer, and great performances against leading clubs. So we have to take it all in that context. But there's no question at the moment, watching last night's performance at Leicester, that there was a control and an assumption, a control on the park where it really mattered, and an assumption of victory, which is something that Ten Hag has hinted at. He's talked about winning shouldn't be something that we have a party about. It should be our job. Yeah. And that was Fergusonian, wasn't it? And so, yes, that's without going back to the Busby era, which was slightly different. Yes, there is a glimmer of a resurgence of Manchester United becoming one day a Manchester United team again.
It's 3 games. This is the sample size in which we're evaluating it on. Three games after losing to Brentford 4-0, and those games have all been decided by a single goal. But we talked about Busby and Ferguson there, but you have to go back to obviously each of Ferguson's successors. Apart from Moyes, it's too small of a sample size, and it was with Ferguson's squad. With Van Gaal, there were two mini runs. There was the one where United won at Anfield, and they had Fellaini still playing as a false 10, and Juan Mata scoring the goal, scissor kick at Anfield, and Rooney doing the boxing celebration against Spurs. Like a mini resurgence there, and then when they had all the injuries and the kids came in, there was a little resurgence there, but there was never anything that you thought, all right, that's something that's going to stay for the long term. You knew that it was like a temporary solution until the next transfer window. With Mourinho, I think there was a run where at the start of his second season, United won a few games by 4 goals with Pogba and Lukaku playing well, but you sort of knew there that they weren't playing really good football. It was Mourinho, Mourinho's best football, kind of, like those 4 goals. They're very clinical. You're not always going to get that level of clinical finishing. So United were just benefiting from it in that moment. And then under Solskjaer, like you've already said, there was a famous start. I think it was like 18 games unbeaten, which effectively landed him the job. But for those of us who sat through those games, the first 2 or 3 games were, they're all right. They were good. They were entertaining. But then the rest of the performances were not so good. The results were good, but the performances were starting to decline. And I'm not saying that we thought Solskjaer was in trouble already. Definitely didn't think that. So we were encouraged by the results. But they were kind of like pluckier results, like what you were referring to, mostly the wins over City, which he had a really good record in the league game. Well, in general games against City, he had a good record there. But earlier on in the cup runs, I think we played Arsenal in the cup, at Chelsea in the cup, we played at Spurs, and Solskjaer's tactical plans were always really good. But the performances were not so good. And I think that's what a lot of us are looking at the moment in time, because we don't know what this sample size of form is going to be, how long it goes. But it's the flickers, isn't it? It's the moments of good football that you see. I mean, when United, there were a few good moments against Liverpool. There were a couple against Southampton, a couple against Leicester last night, and perhaps crucially, most of those good moments have resulted in the match-winning moments. They didn't get a fluke. They were good moments, and they resulted in goals. And then, like I said, certainly against Leicester last night, but again, you have to look at it being a downtrodden Leicester side. There was a control there that you haven't seen from United side, that they actually looked like that. I mean, Eriksen's a great example, because I tweeted about him. I said Eriksen is really settled into this United midfield. And I had a few people saying back he looks like Paul Scholes. And I think obviously it's a massive compliment. And I don't think it's a million miles off the mark. I'm not saying that he was as masterful as Scholes at his peak, but he was very much reminiscent of latter-day Scholes. Like doing the unsung stuff, just moving the ball.
Yeah, playing in small areas. Yeah, I mean that's a good comparison. When I say playing in small areas, I mean Paul Scholes was probably, if he'd had the mobility of Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard, he would have been undoubtedly the greatest English midfield player of one of the greatest English midfield players of all time. And Eriksen at this stage of his career, how old is he now? 31, something like that.
I'd say, yeah.
He's not going to be able to cover ground the way the people that I've just talked about did. So yeah, but he does provide that quality. He provides the intelligence, the simplicity. An awful lot of his passes I noticed in. Yes, I know we are talking about 3 weeks after his disaster at Brentford, but I think he had things on his mind there. After all, he was playing for them the season before, so months before. So it was what was going to be a difficult time. But watching the game since, you've seen what he really can provide, that assurance. Manchester United have done this actually with players. They've been easy to criticize a lot of these transfers, and you can go back all the way to Henrik Larsson, Ibrahimovic, Ronaldo, maybe Casemiro. I know he's only 30, but he's had a long time at Real Madrid. Then there must be other examples of this, of players who've had long careers at other clubs and have come to United almost in a sort of MLS end of school stage of their career, and yet have contributed mightily. I mean, Ibrahimovic as much as anybody, Ronaldo, and I think Eriksen will be very much of that line. I probably missed out one or two of players who came at the end of their careers and
Sheringham I think Sheringham was 31
well,
when he signed.
you can go back even to Sheringham, who took part in the treble and had a key part actually in all three legs of the treble ultimately. So incidentally, speaking of the treble, we talked about books before. I hope that everybody's going to take a look at 1999 by Matt Dickinson. You've already praised this book highly. It's certainly one that I'm certainly looking forward to seeing that from my old journalistic colleague Matt Dickinson. I'm sure you described it as magnificently written and what was it? Magnificently written and with an astonishing amount of detail. But when you get Wayne Barton turning up fresh details, you got to just give Dickinson a round of applause for that. Yep. Anyway, enough of the plugging. To go to Teddy Sheringham. Yes, it was one who came after the age of 30 and definitely made an impact.
Yeah, I mean, if you're watching the history series, then we're coming up to the Dockett era when he certainly made a few of those that you can go back. Arnold Muren, the Atkinson reign is another example. But we're going way back.
This is to bring it more up to date. I think Casemiro, you see, is an example of Manchester United, the Busby Babes made Manchester United a world class sporting institution. The Ferguson era cemented that, and the history of Manchester United has made it attractive for players to sort of think, the way Lewandowski's gone to Barcelona, and if you're a footballer, imagine you're a footballer, you think, oh, it'd be nice to play for Barcelona. Similarly, they think, whoa, looking at those Old Trafford European nights, I wouldn't mind a year at Man United, see how it goes, And I think Casemiro, was, obviously I haven't listened to all his press conferences, and I don't, I don't know what his real reasons for coming to Manchester United are, but I'm sure part of it, and Ibrahimovic as well, he loves a stage, and he'll have seen what happened with the Cantona era and what a stage strutter, what a showman can do at Old Trafford. And so I think the history and tradition and the scale of Manchester United helps them to get these players when otherwise they might just go for money. I'm sure they're being paid, by the way. But you know,
Yeah, it definitely is. But I think what I really like about Eriksen is like the simple economy. Like, you know, after years of watching, and I'm not going to dig all of them out, but Pogba, Herrera, players who don't appear to be comfortable on the ball for
yep,
midfielders. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying
yes,
they're obviously not comfortable on the ball, but comfortable in possession, that they can keep
yeah,
the rhythm of
yeah,
possession going.
yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, they. I noticed you omitted Bruno from that, because if you know, yes, maybe the last year he's not looked a Manchester United player, but by God, he did when they needed him, and he will get back to that, I'm sure. But yes, it's that comfort on the ball, that look of being comfortable in the shirt, if you like, comfortable with the tradition of the club and with the expectations of the worldwide support. I mean, Eriksen with his poker face is just ideal for that. Absolutely ideal for that. And as I say, it's United are lucky to have him.
Yeah. On Ten Hag's control, go back to that a little bit. What I do like, what we've seen from him, one of the things I like, is that he's giving chances, but he's also making swift decisions on the squad. He's not sort of like, I think Solskjaer strung it out a little bit too much with the players that he had. He sort of gave them too many chances, and perhaps that's what you get when you're a player who. And I said this a few times. I think it sort of went amiss or dropped like a lead balloon because it was probably a time when Solskjaer wasn't very popular. But I think a large part of Solskjaer's personality probably came from the fact that for 3 years he could have been kicked out of Old Trafford because he was carrying an injury. You know, he was carrying such a significant injury that, you know, a more ruthless coach would have just said, "All right, well, we've given you a chance to come back," but he didn't. Ferguson kept him around, gave him another chance, and he rewarded him with a sort of nice swan song in 2007 season. Solskjaer played his part on and scored a few goals in that. So I think that probably played a part in the reason why players like Phil Jones have been kept on. But bringing Ten Hag, he's making more ruthless decisions. He's giving, yes, he gave Maguire a chance at the start. He gave Shaw a chance, but as soon as they underperformed, they were out. I mean, you put the captain and Ronaldo on the bench. It's almost like, again, to go back to the Ferguson era, it's like a modern equivalent of taking Maguire and Whiteside out of the team in terms of statement. Or even if you go back to I mean, I'll make another comparison in a moment, but that certainly seems like a kind of statement that he's making at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, that is true, but he's not gone far enough, in my opinion. If you look, I think he needs. I mean, you're quite right to identify this as a success, this ruthlessness. But as an example of where the crossbar is, you just need to look, and I'm sure most of the people listening won't like to hear this. You just need to look across the city to Manchester City. They've been the best, in my opinion, the best in the Premier League, not only for winning titles, but by getting rid of players. As soon as the player's surplus to his requirements, and it doesn't matter, they're not frightened of him doing well elsewhere. Gabriel Jesus, yes, he's above Manchester City at the moment with Arsenal, but they knew what they wanted to do. And they knew that by getting, at the end of the season, they're going to have more goals with Erling Haaland than Gabriel Jesus. And there's no point in keeping Gabriel Jesus if he's going to be on the bench all the time. Yeah. So they get money out of him, which they need it to balance the books at Manchester City, which they haven't always done, of course. But one thing you do have to say about Manchester City is that they've been very, very good at giving, at not having moaning faces hanging around the club. Now, Phil Jones, I'm not saying he's a troublemaker. I'm not saying any of these players are troublemakers, but they're not going to be part of the future of Manchester United. I'll name them. Phil Jones, possibly Maguire, the fullback, Williams, is it? The young lad. He's not going to be a Manchester United player, I don't think. On top of that, the left back, it's Shaw. Now he's not going to be part of the new Manchester United because they brought in a left back who's going to get better and better. Tyrell Malacia, yeah. In my opinion, he's been up there with Eriksen as one of the big improvements. I mean, you just realise what was wrong with Shaw when you see this boy come in. He's much better, isn't he?
He's unbelievable. Him and Eriksen. Martinez to a certain extent, but Martinez is a bit different because you're analysing him more as a defender because of his height. But Malacia and Eriksen, they've just come in and putting in 7 out of 10s, and it's something that you take for granted.
Yeah.
When you watch a successful team, but they've come in and it's for that to be a massive improvement. Yeah, it's Malacia's been incredible.
I think he's been arguably the best so far. Of course, we await the debut of Anthony, and I'm sure we're going to get on to that. I mean, what a mouth-watering fixture is Manchester United's next, even without Anthony. But if you add the prospect of Anthony into it, well, you just start drooling, even as a neutral. But to talk about Lisandro Martinez, when I first saw him, I don't remember seeing him in the game against Brighton, but in the Brentford game, I just was the same as everybody. I thought, what? A Manchester United committing suicide? What's this all about? I mean, you can be a small centre-half, central defender. Cannavaro, I think, was World Player of the Year when he was as a centre-back, and he was no bigger than Martinez. So Gary Neville played centre half, and he's a little fella. So there's no law that says you can't be a small centre half. But it was it was the first time I'd seen Martinez in English football, and it reminded me of the first time I saw Paul Pogba. You remember in a derby against City, and he looked like a kid that won a competition to play for 5 minutes alongside professionals. And he was booked after, I think, at halftime by Ferguson. And yet, he, over the last 2 weeks, has said, right, this is what I need to do. I've studied English football, but now that I know the physical demands of it, this is what I have to do. Whether his lack of height will be exploited as time goes by remains to be seen. But he's not been brushed off, is he?
He was brilliant against Liverpool, man of the match at Southampton, and good against. I mean, the thing is with a defender like Martinez is he's obviously got to compensate. So you're looking at how he compensates and his reading of the game and his tenacity. Getting to the tackles either early enough that the height doesn't matter. Certainly on the ground, he's front foot forward, so he's getting in front.
I mean, another one's just occurred to me. Actually, you talk about defenders who are brainy, who can work out solutions that don't involve physique. Late Jamie Carragher, when he settled down as a centre back, he was no giant, although he was taller than any of the others we've discussed. He was like that. He couldn't compete necessarily physically with wasn't as quick as Shevchenko, for example. But in the end, he got the better of him in Istanbul. So I think, it flashed, that particular contest flashed across my mind when I saw Martinez work out a few angles in those games you've discussed. I'm looking forward to seeing him now because, of course, he can play a little bit as well. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how Harry Maguire may get back in the side because Varane, how long will Varane stay clear of injury? How many games can he play in a month? That remains to be seen. But so that's why I'm not sure. People say, Ten Hag's made his decision about Harry Maguire. I'm not sure yet.
There's a lot of ruthlessness going on in there,
Yeah.
and you're probably right there. Areas where he'll probably have to be more ruthless. We've got a comment in here from Blind Pew. He says, "With Anthony's arrival, do you think Rashford will have some much needed surrender?" This is the point, right? There's no pulling punches in the comments. No fancy in there. But the point,
I thought Rashford played well last night, actually.
But it relates back to the ruthlessness, right? There are other areas in the team that standards will need to be raised, and with Anthony coming in, the likes of Rashford and Sancho and certainly Martial and even Ronaldo, and we'll talk about him in a minute, but all those players now, they need to step up because Anthony's going to play. He's going to play, so there's two spaces left.
Well, he could play all along the front, can't he? If he plays, I mean, to paraphrase Blind Pew, with Anthony's arrival, do you think Jadon Sancho has had a much-needed rocket up his backside? That's another question.
Yeah, no, he's
goal scorer last night after being fairly anonymous in quite a few matches since he came from Dortmund.
Yeah, no, he struggled last season. His goal against Liverpool was outstanding. His quick feet in the box, and you do wonder, first of all, bring better midfielders in, better quality of possession, better quality of chances, pick the heads off the floor, get the shoulders a bit higher. Players playing with more confidence. All of these elements go into it, don't they? And I mean, Sancho. The jury was out on every single player last season. Let's not make bones about it. Every single player, you could look at that and say, well, they won't be part of a title-winning squad for United, either due to quality or age. By the time United are in that position again, this player won't be involved. So you could say the entire squad needed that. And then really, that speaks to what Ten Hag, the triumphs that he's got so far. That he's only brought in 5 players. But it's been that rocket up the backside for a few of these other players. The other thing, just to close on the theme that I brought up at the start about control, and we've talked about like the McGraw and White side, and like with Maguire and Ronaldo being out of the side. The other thing, and you also mentioned trophy. So winning a trophy is going to be the ultimate barometer for Ten Hag. First of all, it looks like he's been backed by the club completely, which is great. Second stage is winning a trophy and getting the players completely convinced in his methods. The other thing, which he sort of did, but I know a lot of people wouldn't give him the responsibility for this, because he was appointed early, because he was in the job early. It's early as last season when he was present at the last game of last season to watch United play to watch us lose at Palace. He was obviously making decisions, and those decisions included taking a contract offer off the table for Paul Pogba. Making decisions over all the players who left on free transfers. Matic, Lingard, Pogba, Mata, all of these players who left. And in a way, obviously those players I'm speaking about weren't anywhere near the profile or quality of best loan Charlton.
No.
But when we look at what Doherty had to do in his first few months in charge, and in terms of addressing the dressing room balance and making sure that there's a different energy in there, it is similar in terms of stature, isn't it? And it was important, really, for Ten Hag that he did that because he immediately gave him some control.
Yes, that's true, and I think United just got rid of Pogba just in time. It appears, because he's not going to have his mind on his football, is he? If he ever did, the United should have sold him 4 years ago, and this is part of the control thing. In fact, they should never have bought him. They sold him. Ferguson sold him. Let him go, should I say? Or maybe had to let him go. But bringing him back was inexplicable to me. After you'd seen a year of him, keeping him on, giving him further contracts, and what that said to me was that there was somebody at the club, and you can only imagine that Ed Woodward was running the club, because he was paid to. Somebody at the club had a special regard for whatever reason for Paul Pogba. Perhaps it was to keep the agent sweet. Perhaps he genuinely felt he was the best, most potent player at the club. I don't know, but I think I'm not alone, and even among Manchester United fans, in finding it utterly bewildering that a club allowed a player's value to run down from 90 million to nil. Was it? Did they get anything for him in the end? From 89 million to nil in front of their eyes. It'd be like jamming a what you call it, a chisel into your petrol tank and watching all the petrol drain out, and then wondering why your car didn't work anymore. It to me utterly inexplicable, but great. It's gone now, and when I talked before about the players that were still at the club, perhaps that was a little unfair to the club, to Ten Hag, and to the club as a whole for getting rid of Lingard, who also had to go. Good player, but too tainted with the regime that had mashed 4 or 5 managers before him, if you include Giggs, and quite a few people from that era have gone, and I hope that Ten Hag will complete the job. Already, you looked at the team, the last 3 wins, and they've got a freshness about them that was never quite achieved under the previous management. There wasn't Luke Shaw trundling up the left wing. There wasn't Wan-Bissaka wondering why he left Crystal Palace in the first place. There was always negatives, and at the moment you can see a lot of a lot of freshness, and I think we've already talked a lot about Malacia, but he epitomizes it for me. He's an absolute breath of fresh air in a way that, what's his name, the Brazilian Telles was brought in to provide that, and a lot of people said he would, but the culture of the club sort of under Malacia and Ten Hag. All I'm saying is that at the moment it's only 3 games, but it feels and looks different.
Yeah, those 3 games, incidentally, Ronaldo's been on the bench. There did seem to be some kind of agreement where he could go if a reasonable offer came in for him, but his wages and other reasons meant that didn't happen. Apparently, there were a couple of deals somewhat dependent on movement in that area, both in and out of United, and Memphis at Barcelona. A lot of things seem to be riding on that as well. Obviously, Ronaldo's now staying at the club, much to the delight of my nephew, I'm sure, but maybe not for people older than 7 years old, even though I felt quite excited when he first came back. Obviously, there's a world-class player in there still at the age of 37.
Oh, yeah.
You can't score 25 goals at the age of 37 and then 3 hat-tricks was it 3 or just 2 hat-tricks in the Premier League last season. You can't break the records that he did last season and not still be considered world-class. However, we know that from this system, it's very difficult to envisage, and the speed of the Premier League, it's difficult to envisage where he fits into that side. But you can say that he'll start the Europa League games. Perhaps he'll start games against your Bournemouth or Forest or teams with slower centre backs. Do you think that that's going to be the way that Ten Hag deals with him from now?
Yes, although he will have to he'll have to keep his running in, and he'll have to do a wee bit of pressing, because he'll have to sort of reinvent, no, tweak, yes. On the other hand, the potential for him for the umpteenth time to have the last laugh is there, and he will have seen that. I mean, he's not worried about money because he's on what, $500,000 a week. So that's all right. But players don't get to be that good. Players don't get to be worth that much money if all they're worried about is money. He is worried about legacy, about image, about being the great I am. And that possibility is still there at Old Trafford. And he will know that. But he does have to tweak his game, yes, a little bit, but there was the old Scotland manager, Craig Brown, I was talking to him once, and he used the phrase a cheer sub. And I said, what's a cheer sub? He said, well, a cheer sub, I always like on the bench, when I'm naming my bench, I always like to have someone who if we're not doing well, will lift the crowd, lift the other players, change the atmosphere. And okay, we might only get 10 minutes of impetus. But during that 10 minutes, he or somebody might score. And so always good to have a cheer sub. Somebody will cause a cheer when he comes on, rather than, I mean, you put on Herrera or Brandon Williams or Phil Jones. The crowd doesn't go potty. But if you put on Ronaldo, there'll be 76,000 people off their seats.
Yeah.
And that impetus will be there. So, yeah. And he also has the opportunity that when he does start games, scoring a hat-trick. Okay, what are you going to do about that, Erik?
Yeah.
You're going to drop me after a hat-trick against Galatasaray or whoever it might be? Of course not. So there's still plenty to play for there. And I'd be disappointed if he headed off to America or somewhere, in January. But who knows? Who knows what will happen between now and then?
Yeah, definitely interesting. Like I said, he's a player who's definitely reinvented himself a couple of times as well, and now he's faced with this. You might as well make the best out of it, and he's certainly one who's going to do that. And to be fair, he pressed under Rangnick. A lot of people didn't see that, but he did, and he was in the team all the time, and he scored a fair few goals. It was pretty much the only goals we scored seemed to be. And so he's capable of doing it. He's obviously still the best finisher that we've got. So we'll see how that goes. We'll close out by talking about Anthony, and he's registered to play against Arsenal. Arsenal's going to be a very good test considering their start to the season. The fact that they weren't brilliant against Fulham. I think Fulham probably deserves something from that game.
Most of our lot who were there said that, but it was certainly very close. But the fact is, 15 points from 5 matches.
Yeah,
very
strong start. Yeah,
very, very strong start, and all of those people, and there were lots of them, Arsenal people who said, oh God, this Arteta's, a pale imitation of Guardiola. We don't want him. Blah blah blah. You don't hear a lot of that now, and there's a. I talked before about the hope that there's a freshness about Manchester United that other regimes have not been able to achieve under Ten Hag. There's undoubtedly that freshness, exuberance. A lot of it comes from homegrown youth, in the case of Arsenal, but it's there. And when I say homegrown, I mean some of Martinelli's not. And they'll have to watch. United will have to watch him. He's having a good start to the season, but youth that's grown up with the club, if you see what I mean. So yeah, that and the intensity with which they play is something that United have not been tested quite in the same way in some of the games on their recent mini run. So it's absolutely mouthwatering. But if Manchester United play with the relish and intensity that they showed against Liverpool, they can win it.
Also, not just a cheer sub, probably a cheer starter.
Yeah.
If they decide to go with Anthony, Anthony, £85 million, the second most expensive player in the club's history. United wanted Ronaldinho back in 2003, and I'm
Yeah,
not saying that he's in the same class as him, but he does things on the ball that remind you of Ronaldinho. He's there to entertain. He's
yeah.
there to put on a show. He's very much in that respect a player that right out of the United playbook, isn't he? He's
Oh yes. If I can remember early Ronaldo
yeah,
actually, he was an entity. In fact, he was criticised that somebody called him a show pony, and in fact, lots of people became the phrase that you associate with him because he did like a trick. And of course, what we probably didn't know is that he was working out which tricks worked 9 times out of 10 and which only worked 5 times out of 10. I mean, looking back on it, um, that was a phase he went through, and probably deliberately or at least instinctively. Um, I don't know. I don't. I just can't wait to see Anthony, and maybe we're expecting too much too soon. But you know, to have a true entertainer at Old Trafford would just increase the happiness of an already um, well. You can answer. A question's just gone across my mind, Wayne, and I can only really get an answer from you because I don't know. I'm not a season ticket holder. I'm not a Old Trafford regular. But can you still hate the ownership while loving the club? Can you forget the ownership for 90 minutes if the product on the field's good enough? For example, during the Liverpool game, did you give a second thought to Joel Glazer?
it's a great question. You know me well enough to know that I'm such a purist about the football that, like, the
Uh-huh.
second the minute goes, I'm just invested in the game. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the atmosphere is all around you anyway. You know, especially at the moment with the intense protests. I know that they exist and that they're there. But like Liverpool's a great example because when you're in the moment, especially that game, it's the game that I absolutely detest every season because I hate I liked it when it was at 12:30 kickoff because it's over
Mm.
and done with early in the day. If it's at 8 o'clock at night, I don't know why they do it because you put through it like the entire day just thinking about it. The entire game is that, and then it's like waiting for it to be over. Especially when you're winning, it's just like blow the whistle, man. Do you know what I mean? The first half, like make this game end after 26 minutes, like, you know, curtail it so it had to be abandoned and the score sticks. So that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You can because remember, like, United are not just who they are at the moment, and this is the same for any football club, any fan of any club. They are your entire memories of going, and you know, your entire history of going to that club and watching that team. And then if you do enjoy the club's history and stuff like that, or your club's history, not just United's, especially United, because you know it's so rich, you can go back and, you know, your relationship is with all of that as well, you know. And I don't know. I'm not saying that I enjoy losing. Definitely do not. There were moments where you know, I saw people walking out at half time, before half time when we lost 5-0 to Liverpool last year, and thinking, I'm not one of those. I'll sit through I'm not saying that that separates me in any way from anyone else, but I'll just sit and watch the entire thing. It is like, and United's lows are moderate compared to the average football fan. For example,
Mm.
we didn't career down the divisions or anything like that. Like
Like Leeds United or Leicester,
exactly. So you understand, like,
Sheffield Wednesday.
The travails are fairly moderate. United, this is as low as it's been since the relegation season, but they were
Hmm.
still a top half team.
Hmm.
And I'm sure, and I'm definitely want to say this, that the team at times probably not as good as the relegation team. That team was more
Yeah,
popular and
yeah.
probably played better football.
More popular, yeah. Mm.
But but there is still something. It's cathartic when you watch them win against Liverpool the way that they did recently, and your relationship is with the team. Real, you know what I mean. You're going to
Yes.
watch them play football, and you want to get behind the manager, and these are the things that you are involved in. That's your relationship for those 90 minutes. You're there to back the team, and and be like that. All the other stuff, yeah, I can understand why it's happening, and and I'm certainly, I have my own opinions on that, and I've voiced them on this channel before. But it's backing the team, because there's something. It was last night I tweeted about it, but it's something that I've been feeling. When we played well, there were 3 or 4 patterns of play in the first half where it looked like United, like they had a little bit of oomph about them. Even McTominay was being so maligned, looked to play well because there were good players playing around him, and he was full of confidence. And it was so good to see. It was so good to see Sancho with confidence, and Rashford especially. You want to see him drive at people because you know that he's good. And when they do it, I get emotional watching it. It's just like, oh God, you're back. There's a little bit of you that's back. Do you know what I mean? And it's like that's my relationship with it as well. And I'm sure it's the same for like thousands of other people. So yeah, and the idea of seeing someone like Anthony coming in, who does that kind of thing, who's literally there to entertain. You don't know. I mean, I used to love the conversations I had with Clayton Blackmore. He would talk about Olsen and Strachan, and they weren't economic wingers. They like to stop and they like to start. Do you know? And that was frustrating for the forwards.
Yes,
the fans loved them, but the forwards found it a little bit frustrating. I wonder if that's
they would have rather had Steve Coppell, wouldn't they?
Exactly. Oh yeah, Beckham, Giggs.
Get beyond, cross it.
Yeah, that's exactly. But that's the thing. And Anthony's probably more down the Strachan and Olsen line, but we haven't had that entertainment. That just carefree liberal entertainment, and that's enjoying watching the team play again, and then putting an entertainer into that.
Yeah.
Even I was talking yesterday about this, the Arsenal game. Obviously, you want to win every single game, but United's resurgence is bigger than individual games and results at the moment. It's about establishing a pattern of play. So even if they play well and they draw on Sunday, as long as we see a good game and we see that the team are moving in the right direction, it's the thing. I know I veered away, but it was such a great question there, Paddy. I wanted to give it the comprehensive.
Thank you. But it's yes, it's the nature of James Radcliffe. What's James saying?
When players cross the white line, nothing else matters. Surely the fans should demonstrate the same.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, that is a good point. You can make your argument. You can make your argument before and after. I think, but the only thing, and I'd be interested to know if James Radcliffe agrees with us. James Radcliffe? That's Jim Radcliffe. Jim, buy the club. Don't give us your opinion. Just buy the club. But the only thing I would say is yes, it's because in a way you say you want a performance from the players. When I watch my club, I in a way I love the fans more than the players, because the fans are part of my family. The players might not be. The players, would Bruno be here if it was Bury rather than Manchester United? Is the money coming to it slightly? Whereas the fan, okay, Manchester United, like most big clubs, have a proportion of people who adhere to the club because it's a way of feeling better, because it's a big club and blah blah blah. Manchester United, we do what we want and all that kind of stuff. But there is still there are a large population, a large proportion, even of Manchester United supporters, and certainly when I support Dundee, a much bigger proportion of a much smaller entity who are there because they haven't got a choice. Because, and if you look back to the relegation season, what was it, 1974, 73, 4 was it? When United got relegated, and the crowd hardly changed in the second division, of what would now be the Championship. The crowd, what did it go down by? About 4,000 or 5,000, something like that. Not much. It was basically the same people said, "Okay, well, we'll watch them in the second division then."
Yeah.
And that sort of family aspect, the only thing I would change about your answer to my question, what would be, from my point of view, would be that I love probably my fellow fans more than the players.
Yeah. I think that it made a difference, and it does. I think online, I'm not going to start digging in on online fans, but obviously there's been such a difficult atmosphere, and then there will be, because United were losing games and they weren't playing well, and there was a difficult atmosphere in the ground. They were booed off.
Yeah, but you got stick. You got stick for doing what James, who's just messaged in. You got stick for doing what he absolutely, in my opinion, rightly says you should do. You were backing your manager.
Yeah.
And not just not in a blind way. You actually thought Solskjaer deserved a bit of credit. And you were getting stick from so-called Manchester United fans for being loyal to your club.
Yeah. Well,
and that in a way does shake your faith in your fellow fan. I take your point there.
Yeah, it is one thing, but I still think that when you get there, all that kind of thing, it's like politics, right? You can have friends who've got different opinions. I'm fine with that. If someone thinks that Solskjaer didn't do a good job or that he deserved to be sacked, that's fine. We're still mates at the end of the day. It doesn't really matter. But I still think that when you're there at the crowd, look, playing for United is difficult enough as it is. It's one of the most pressurized environments in world sport. They've got to put in a performance every single week. And that's no different to any other football fan, really, in a certain way. But because the eyes of the country are always on United and the headlines are always there, scrutinised in a different way. And I think the audience, the support, has got a role to play in that, as they do in every sporting event. And you can either choose to use that energy positively, or you can use it negatively. And that United team, you could tell they were responding very badly to negative energy. So try and be positive. And you could see against Liverpool, they were fantastic. The crowd, the atmosphere there was incredible. And obviously playing away from home the last couple of games on the back of that has probably helped, because United's away support is always fantastic. So it'll be interesting to see.
At Leicester, it was like a home game. I was thinking, those Leicester fans are making quite a lot of noise. I was only watching on telly. I was thinking, those Leicester fans are pretty noisy for a load of fans who've had a terrible window on the bottom of the league. Of course, it was the United fans. I don't know how many there were, 2,000 maybe, but they made a right lot of noise. And so, yeah, you must be happier than you've been for a while anyway. 3 weeks.
Yeah, we got for 3 weeks. We've got a comment in here. Ole was on a hiding to nothing from many fans. But you also have
completely agree with that. Completely agree with that. It was almost a wee bit like Roy Hodgson at Liverpool, because Kenny Dalglish had been in for the job, and so he was the anti-Kenny, and yeah, you would have thought that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer would be so embedded into the hearts of the Manchester United support that. But you're quite right. Everyone assumed that Pochettino and United were destined to come together.
Yeah. There was still
anyway,
some people.
We're nearly an hour. We said this is
we're wrapping up.
What chance have we got, when there's so much to talk about?
Yeah. It's fair, the Pochettino point. I mean, Ten Hag was, after his first couple of games, people were saying, they should have got Pochettino, he's available, and that was already starting. But it looks like Ten Hag turned a corner until possibly, if we lose against Arsenal, then the knives will be back out for him. But that'll be that. We'll be back with Paddy will be back next week on the History Podcast. The next History Podcast that we've got is the 67-68 season. Something good happened in that one, so you want to be
that'll be a good cracker.
So, a few years before the relegation, at least. Some good stuff to enjoy. And if you've enjoyed watching the podcast, please give us a like and subscribe on the channel. If you're listening back on the audio podcast, please be sure to give us a review on the platform you're listening on. I think Keane will be on tonight with Phil. I'm pretty sure he will be previewing Sunday's game, and I'll be back on Monday to talk over the game with Paul Parker. Until next week, stay safe, stay well. Thanks for listening. And